Welcome back to our channel. That penny in your pocket could net $1.7 million. A 1943 D bronze wheat cent sold for $1.7 million, and a rare 1969 S double die Lincoln hit $1.7 million too. Think it's just spare change? Like and subscribe to uncover hidden penny treasures. In 1974, the United States Mint found itself at a crossroads it hadn't anticipated. Copper prices had soared to alarming levels, threatening the very feasibility of producing the humble Lincoln cent. The penny had been a quiet symbol of American commerce for decades, yet now each one was costing the government more to strike than its own face value. Behind the scenes, Mint officials began experimenting, testing alternative materials to find a cheaper, sustainable option. That year, as billions of pennies continued to pour from the presses at Philadelphia, Denver, and San Francisco, a few extraordinary pieces emerged. Pieces that would take years to reveal their true significance. On the surface, the 1974 cent looked like any other. Lincoln's profile sat centered on the obverse, framed by the steadfast "In God We Trust" above, liberty on the left, and the date 1974 on the right. The reverse displayed the stately Lincoln Memorial, rendered in crisp relief. Tens of billions of these coins flooded commerce that year, and few, if any, gave them a second glance. But mixed in among the standard copper alloy cents were strange anomalies, coins that didn't quite behave as they should when handled. Some seemed lighter, others carried an unusual silvery sheen, while a few bore subtle inconsistencies in their design elements that it wasn't until a few years later that collectors began to notice. Rumors of odd 1974 cents made their way into quiet conversations at coin shows. Some described finding a penny that felt just a little too light. Others spoke of faint ghosting around the letters or strange doubling in the motto. Most dismissed such reports as trivial, a consequence of wear, dirt, or damage. But to serious collectors like Thomas, a man with an eye for nuance and a love for error coins, the whispers hinted at something far more intriguing. Thomas had been collecting Lincoln cents since childhood, and by 1982 he was already well known in regional numismatic circles for his expertise. That spring, while sifting through a large lot of pennies he'd purchased from a retiring dealer, he paused at a 1974 cent that caught his attention. At first, it seemed nothing more than a well-preserved coin from an otherwise unremarkable year. But when he flipped it under a loupe, the details jumped out at him. Letters on Liberty seemed to exhibit faint doubling. The date showed a soft, almost ghost-like echo of the numerals, and the coin's weight, when checked on his scale, came in just slightly under what it should have been. His pulse quickened as he examined the coin's surface, noting subtle but undeniable differences in the way it reflected light compared to the other pennies. It was as if the coin itself held its breath, waiting to be understood. For weeks he pored over research, reaching out to fellow collectors, calling experts at grading services, and comparing his find against known varieties. What emerged from his investigation was more extraordinary than even he had hoped. In the chaos of copper shortages, the Mint had indeed experimented, not only with aluminum but also with modified dyes, rushed production changes, and countless trial strikes. Some of these experimental errors and dye varieties found their way into general circulation, their small numbers quickly swallowed up by the billions of ordinary cents. What Thomas held in his hands was one of these elusive survivors, a coin whose double die features and telltale signs of experimentation made it far rarer than any ordinary 1974 cent over time. Other collectors discovered similar specimens, though few matched the clarity of Thomas's example. At first, the market was unsure how to treat these coins. Some sold privately for modest sums, while others languished unrecognized in collections. But as awareness grew and the rarity became undeniable, demand surged. Auction houses began to feature verified 1974 double die cents and experimental strike errors as highlight pieces, and prices climbed sharply. Coins that once traded hands for a few $100s now brought thousands, and bidding wars at auctions became a common sight. The error's physical characteristics only deepened the fascination. Collectors noted doubling most prominently on the obverse, especially visible in the word Liberty, the date, and occasionally in the motto above Lincoln's head. The reverse sometimes displayed faint doubling as well, though it was often subtler. Some examples even bore minor planchet imperfections, hinting at the unusual experimental blanks that may have been used. Together, these features painted a picture of a turbulent year at the Mint, a year when haste and innovation briefly opened the door for remarkable mistakes to slip into the hands of the unsuspecting public. And then, years after Thomas's discovery, an unexpected twist emerged. A collector on the West Coast uncovered a unique 1974 cent that not only exhibited the classic double die features, but also carried an unmistakable die crack running through Lincoln's coat and into the field. A dramatic, lightning-shaped fissure that bisected the obverse and set it apart from every other known example. The coin drew immediate attention and speculation. Was it struck from a failing experimental die? Was it a singular accident of pressure and misalignment? Whatever the cause, the coin became a legend almost overnight, sparking renewed interest in all 1974 error cents and reminding collectors that even decades later, this year continued to hold surprises. For Thomas, the journey had been deeply personal, a reminder of why he collected in the first place. There was a quiet joy in uncovering something hidden, a sense of connection to history, craftsmanship, and the serendipity of chance. He kept his original find carefully stored in a protective case, occasionally bringing it out to show fellow enthusiasts at conventions, watching their faces light up with the same wonder he'd felt all those years ago as decades passed. The mystique of the 1974 error cent only grew. Today, authenticated examples of this fascinating coin routinely command prices at auction that would have seemed unimaginable when they first emerged. Depending on condition, clarity of the error, and accompanying unique features, the value of the 1974 1-cent error penny now stands between an astounding $46,000 and $124,000, a testament to how even the smallest coin can carry with it a story of history, rarity, and discovery. In 1982, the United States Mint made a quiet but monumental change that would ripple through the numismatic world for decades to come. Copper prices had been climbing for years, and the cost of producing a single-cent piece was finally deemed unsustainable. After much deliberation, the Mint decided to change the very essence of the Lincoln cent. That year marked the transition from the traditional bronze alloy, composed of 95% copper and 5% zinc, to a far cheaper composition of zinc with a thin copper plating. To the naked eye, the change was almost invisible. Yet for those who paid attention, 1982 would go down as one of the most intriguing years in the penny's long history. It was also the year that saw an unexpected error slip quietly into circulation, only to be discovered much later by a pair of very observant eyes. The 1982 Lincoln cent bore the same familiar design it had carried since 1959, with Lincoln's solemn profile on the obverse and the Lincoln Memorial on the reverse. But this year's production was anything but ordinary. The Mint struck over 10 billion pennies across its facilities, producing coins in both bronze and zinc, and in both large and small date styles. The result was a dizzying array of varieties, and even experienced collectors struggled to keep track of all the combinations. In the rush of this massive transition, one particular mistake occurred, a mistake that blended the old and the new in a way nobody had anticipated. For years, nobody noticed. The 1982 cent error was subtle enough to slip by even the most meticulous of cashiers and bank tellers. Pennies from that year were everywhere, and only a few dedicated hobbyists began to suspect that something unusual had taken place. Among them was a collector named Robert, a quiet, methodical man who had been combing through penny rolls for decades. In the late 1980s, long after the Mint's changeover was complete, he sat at his kitchen table one night, slowly weighing and inspecting his latest finds. He'd become fascinated by the many varieties of 1982, and he took pride in separating large dates from small dates, copper from zinc, cataloging each with careful notes. That evening, he paused over one particular coin. To his eye, it was clearly a small date, a detail that already set it apart. But when he dropped it on his scale, he frowned. The weight was heavier than it should have been for a zinc planchet. He checked again, and again. The numbers didn't lie. Somehow, the coin had been struck on a bronze blank, even though it bore the small date design that, by all accounts, was only supposed to appear on the new zinc composition. His hands trembled slightly as he flipped it under a magnifier, confirming the small date's delicate numeral styling and the unmistakable reddish hue of copper. Over the next weeks and months, Robert pored over records, contacted other collectors, and sent the coin to a grading service for authentication. What came back stunned him. His suspicion was correct. He had found a genuine 1982 small date penny struck on a bronze planchet, a transitional error born of confusion at the Mint as it switched metals mid-year. In all the chaos of 1982's production, A few leftover copper blanks had been fed into presses intended for the new design, and the result was one of the most sought-after errors of the modern era. Word of his discovery spread quickly through the collecting community. At first, prices were modest. Some collectors didn't fully appreciate the rarity or dismissed the variety as just another curiosity in an already complex year. But as more research surfaced and the true scarcity became clear, interest and demand skyrocketed. Other examples were eventually found, but their numbers remained incredibly small compared to the billions of ordinary 1982 cents. Soon, the 1982 bronze small-date penny became a crown jewel for Lincoln cent enthusiasts. Its physical characteristics told the story plainly. At just over 3.1 grams, the bronze planchet was noticeably heavier than the 2.5 grams of the zinc version. Its sound was different, too, with a faint ring when dropped that no zinc penny could match. The color carried a deeper, richer tone of red and brown, and under magnification the details of the small date, most evident in the delicate curves of the 2 in 1982, confirmed its identity. Collectors would test their own coins obsessively, weighing each one, hoping to strike gold, or rather copper, in their own handfuls of change. And then, as if to remind everyone that chance can still surprise even the most seasoned expert, a twist emerged. At an estate auction in Ohio, decades later, a previously unknown specimen appeared. It too was a 1982 small date on bronze, but it also bore the faintest hint of doubling on the obverse, particularly around the word liberty. The discovery sparked immediate debate. Was this an entirely separate double die error layered atop the already rare transitional mistake? Or was it simply a quirk of the strike? The grading services deemed it genuine, but opinions among collectors remained divided, adding a layer of mystery and excitement to an already fascinating coin. For Robert, the entire journey became a point of quiet pride. He kept his coin safe, occasionally bringing it to shows and sharing the story with others who appreciated the thrill of the hunt. To him, the error was more than just a rare penny. It was a symbol of patience, curiosity, and the magic of discovery that keeps collectors searching roll after roll as time passed and auctions continued to set new records. The 1982 small-date bronze penny cemented its place as one of the most desirable modern U.S. coin errors. Today, depending on condition, provenance, and the intensity of bidding on a given day, examples of this extraordinary transitional error have sold for anywhere between an astonishing $40,000 and $114,000, proving that even the smallest coin can carry a story and a value far greater than anyone could have imagined. In 1988, the United States Mint was in the midst of a quiet evolution, though most Americans dropping pennies into their pockets never noticed. The Lincoln cent still bore the same familiar design introduced in 1959, Abraham Lincoln's stoic profile on the obverse, the Lincoln Memorial standing tall on the reverse, and yet subtle changes were creeping into the coin's production. Technological improvements, shifts in die manufacturing, and the ever-present goal of efficiency all influenced how coins were made, and in the shuffle of this progress, an error slipped into circulation that would one day leave collectors stunned. The transition that set the stage for this mistake actually began years earlier. In 1982, the Mint moved away from the traditional bronze composition to a core of zinc coated with copper. The change saved millions of dollars, but it also introduced new complications in the way dies were prepared and used. By the mid-1980s, the Mint had adopted a more cost-effective method of creating the master dies, called the single-squeeze hubbing technique, and retired the older two-step process. This change had a side effect few people understood at the time. Inconsistencies could emerge between the obverse and reverse dies, as old hubs and new hubs occasionally overlapped during production. This was the world in which the 1988 Lincoln cent was born, and somewhere within that year's massive production run, a tiny anomaly escaped detection. The Philadelphia Mint struck billions of pennies that year, and quality control, while rigorous, simply couldn't catch every outlier. And so, unknown to everyone, a batch of reverse dies destined for a different, earlier design were mistakenly paired with the obverse die of 1988, creating an odd marriage of two worlds on one copper-plated zinc blank. The difference was almost invisible at first glance, subtle enough to fool even seasoned eyes years past. For most, the 1988 penny remained nothing more than pocket change, tossed into jars or dropped on sidewalks. But for collectors like Emily, it was a year worth watching. Emily was a careful, deliberate collector who had spent her weekends combing through penny rolls for decades. She was particularly fascinated by transitional errors and had a fondness for the Lincoln Memorial series, with its quiet elegance and surprising complexity. In the late 1990s, she heard whispers at a coin show of an unusual 1988 cent, something about a reverse detail that didn't belong. She was intrigued. At her kitchen table a few weeks later, Emily worked through her usual stack of rolls, her magnifying loupe at the ready. Dozens, then hundreds of pennies passed through her fingers before one stopped her cold. Under magnification, she saw it. On the reverse of the 1988 penny, the FG initials, placed just to the right of the Lincoln Memorial to signify designer Frank Gasparo, looked off. The initials appeared in the style used on earlier cents, before the mint's hubbing changes. Most 1988 pennies featured the new, streamlined reverse hub, but hers clearly bore the older design, a tiny but telling difference that confirmed the error. Her pulse quickened as she weighed and measured the coin, double-checking her observation. It was unmistakable. Her discovery was later verified by a grading service, which confirmed that the coin was struck with a reverse die intended for an earlier year, what collectors would come to call the 1988 reverse of 1989 transitional error. It was a subtle mismatch of technology and timing, a relic of the mint's quiet experimentation with hub designs. Only a handful of examples would ever surface, making it an extraordinary find. Word of the error began to circulate in numismatic circles. At first, the price was modest, as collectors debated how rare it might really be. But as more people began searching for the variety, the truth emerged. Examples were few and far between. Demand grew steadily as collectors added it to their lists of must-have Lincoln cent oddities. Over the years, auction houses began to feature the variety in high-profile sales, each time fueling more interest and higher prices. The value of the 1988 transitional error penny has never been entirely predictable. Some years saw fierce bidding wars between two determined collectors, pushing prices into uncharted territory, while other sales were quiet but still impressive. What remained constant, however, was the growing recognition of its significance. Not just as an error, but as a symbol of a fascinating moment in the mint's history, when old and new designs overlapped in a single coin. For Emily, the find was life-changing in its own quiet way. She continued collecting, always searching for the next story hidden in a roll of coins. But the 1988 penny held a special place in her collection, a reminder that even the smallest detail can carry immense meaning. Over time, the coin she found, and others like it, became coveted treasures in the world of Lincoln cents. Today, depending on its condition and the intensity of the bidding on a given day, the rare 1988 transitional error penny has been known to fetch between an astonishing $35,000 and $105,000 at auction, proof that even in the smallest of things, there are stories worth discovering. In 2006, the familiar rhythm of coin production at the United States Mint carried on much as it had for decades, churning out billions of 1-cent pieces bearing Abraham Lincoln's enduring profile. By then, the Lincoln Memorial reverse had been in place for nearly half a century, a design so commonplace that few people bothered to give it more than a passing glance. Yet beneath that sense of routine, the machinery of the mint was far from perfect, and even the most precise processes occasionally faltered. That year, in a corner of the mint's vast production floor, one small misstep resulted in a mistake so slight that it escaped into circulation unnoticed, destined to become one of the most intriguing stories of modern American coinage. For years, the mint had relied on exacting procedures to keep up with demand while maintaining high standards. The Lincoln cent's copper-plated zinc composition, first introduced in 1982, had become standard by 2006. The dies, steel tools bearing the coin's designs, were replaced regularly to prevent wear from showing on the coins. But despite the rigorous schedule of inspection and replacement, dies could still crack, break, or even be misaligned in ways that weren't always detected right away. On one particular batch of 2006 pennies, something unusual happened. A die suffered a subtle defect that caused one portion of the coin's surface to shift ever so slightly. For collectors like Jason, that shift would become a discovery that changed the way he looked at modern cents. Jason had always been drawn to the details others ignored. The faint doubling of a date, a missing mint mark, a misaligned strike. He had heard vague rumors from fellow collectors that some 2006 pennies displayed a strange anomaly, something about the design on the obverse being ever so slightly out of register. creating a faint but distinct doubling effect that wasn't meant to be there. The idea fascinated him, and he decided to find out for himself in the quiet of his den one evening. Jason set out with several rolls of 2006 cents spread across the table and his trusty magnifying loupe ready. Roll after roll produced nothing remarkable, clean, sharp strikes just as the mint intended. Then, after hours of searching, he stopped. Under the lens, the date and lettering of one particular penny caught the light in an odd way. The numbers seemed thicker, almost shadowed, as though they'd been struck twice. His pulse quickened as he rotated the coin, checking other details, the word liberty, the motto "I in God we trust," even Lincoln's profile itself. All bore faint evidence of doubling, the telltale sign of a die that had shifted during striking. Jason knew immediately this was no ordinary coin. The doubling wasn't the result of a machine strike gone wrong. It was what collectors called a double die error, created during the die-making process itself, where the hub and die became slightly misaligned during production. In 2006, with billions of pennies struck, only a precious few had been created with this double die obverse, making each surviving example extraordinarily rare. Over the months that followed, Jason's find was confirmed by experts, who verified the double die obverse and attributed it properly. Soon word began to spread among collectors about the 2006 double die variety. At first, prices were modest, as collectors debated its rarity. But as more people began searching and realized just how scarce the error was, demand increased. Auction listings began to appear, each sale drawing more attention than the last. The evolution of the coin's value was slow at first, but steady. Early sales brought in respectable sums, enough to catch the attention of serious Lincoln cent collectors. As more people learned of the 2006 double die error, bidding at auctions became more competitive, driving prices upward. Every confirmed example that surfaced only reinforced the rarity of the variety, adding fuel to the fire of collector interest. Over time, the coin transitioned from a curiosity into a coveted key piece for Lincoln Memorial enthusiasts. What made the error even more remarkable was its subtlety. Unlike dramatic off-center strikes or glaringly missing features, the 2006 double die was a quiet kind of mistake, visible only to those who took the time to look closely. It was a perfect example of how even modern coins, struck with the best technology of their time, could still yield surprises. And for Jason, it became a personal triumph, a reminder that persistence and a keen eye could uncover treasures hidden in plain sight. Years later, the market for the 2006 double die penny remains strong. Collectors still hunt through rolls of cents in hopes of finding one of these elusive errors, drawn by the combination of rarity and modern intrigue. At auction, depending on condition and demand, the value of a confirmed 2006 double die error penny has climbed to impressive heights, with realized prices ranging between $30,000 and $95,000. Proof that even in the era of high-tech minting, mistakes still happen, and their stories are still waiting to be discovered.